Wonder upon wonders. In the sitting room of the doctor's house, just as you enter the room, there stands on the left, close to the wall, a high glass case in which the children preserve all of the beautiful things that were given to them every year. Louise was quite a little girl when her father had the case made by a skillful joiner who'd set it in such large clear panes of glass and arranged all the parts so well together that everything looked much brighter and handsomer when on its shelves than it would when in the hands. On the upper shelf, which Maria and Fred were unable to reach, stood all Godfather Drosselmeyer's curious machines. Immediately below this was a shelf for the picture books. The two lower shelves Maria and Fred filled as they pleased. But it always happened that Maria used the lower one as a house for her dolls, whilst Fred, on the contrary, cantoned his troops in the one above. And so it happened today, for while Fred set his hussars in the order above, Maria, having laid Miss Trutchen aside, and having installed the new and sweetly dressed doll in her best furnished chamber below, had invited herself to tea with her. I've said that the chamber was well furnished, and it's true. Here was a nice chintz sofa and several tiny chairs. There stood a tea table, but above all there was a clean white little bed for her doll upon to repose. All these things were arranged in one corner of the glass case, the sides of which were hung with gay pictures, and it will readily be supposed that in such a chamber the new doll, Miss Clara, must have found herself a very comfortable home. It was now late in the evening, and night indeed was close at hand, and Godfather Drosselmeyer had long since gone home. Yet still the children could not leave the glass case, although their mother repeatedly told them that it was high time to go to bed. "It is true," cried Fred at last. "The poor fellows," meaning his hussars, "would like to get a little rest, and as long as I'm here, not one of them will dare to nod. I know that." With these words he went to bed, but Maria begged very hard. "Only leave me here a little while, dear mother. I have 2 or 3 things to attend to, and then, when they are done, I will immediately go to bed." Maria was a very good and sensible child, and therefore her mother could leave her alone with her playthings without anxiety. But for fear that she might become so interested in her new doll and other presents as to forget the lights which burned around the case, her mother blew them all out and left only the lamp which hung down from the ceiling in the middle of the chamber, and which diffused a soft and pleasant light. "Come in soon, dear Maria, or you will not be up in time tomorrow morning," called Mother as she went to bed. There was something that Maria had at heart to do, which she had not told her mother, though she knew not the reason why, and as soon as she found herself alone, she went quickly about it. She still carried in her arms the wounded Nutcracker, rolled up in her pocket handkerchief. She laid him carefully upon the table and unrolled the handkerchief slowly and examined his wound. The Nutcracker was very pale, but still smiled so kindly and sorrowfully that it went straight to Maria's heart. "Ah, Nutcracker, Nutcracker, do not be angry at Brother Fred because he hurt you so. He didn't mean to be so rough. It is the wild soldier's life with his hussars that has made him a little hard-hearted. But otherwise he is a good fellow, I can assure you. Now, I will tend you very carefully until you are well and merry again. And as to fastening your teeth and setting your shoulders, that Godfather Drosselmeyer must do. He understands such things." But Maria was hardly able to finish the sentence, for as she mentioned the name of Drosselmeyer, friend Nutcracker made a terrible wry face, and there darted something out of his eyes like green sparkling flashes. Maria was just going to fall into a dreadful fright when, behold, it was the sad, smiling face of the honest Nutcracker again, which she saw before her, and she knew now that it must have been a glare of the lamp which, stirred by a draught, had flared up and distorted the Nutcracker's features so strangely. "Am I not a right foolish girl," she said, "to be so easily frightened, and to think that a wooden puppet could make faces at me? But I love Nutcracker too well, because he is so droll and so good-tempered. Therefore he should be taken good care of as he deserves." With this, Maria took friend Nutcracker in her arms and walked to the glass case, stooped down and said to her new doll, "Pray, Miss Clara, be so good as to give up your bed to the sick and wounded Nutcracker. and make out as well as you can on the sofa. Remember that you are well and hearty, or you would not have such fat red cheeks. And very few little dolls have such nice sofas. Miss Clara, in her gay Christmas attire, looked very grand and haughty, and would not even say muck. But "Why should I stand up on ceremony?" said Maria, and she took out of bed and laid the little Nutcracker down upon it softly, and rolled a gently nice ribbon which she wore round her waist about his poor shoulders, and then drew the bedclothes over him so snugly, so as there was nothing to be seen of him below the nose. "He shan't stay with haughty Clara," she said, and raised the bed with the Nutcracker in it to the shelf above, and placed it close by the pretty village where Fred's hussars were quartered. She locked the case and was about to go up to bed when, listen children, when softly, softly it began to rustle and to whisper and to rattle round and round under the hearth, behind the stairs, behind the chair and the cupboards and the glass case. The great clock whirred louder and louder, but it could not strike. Maria turned toward it, and there was a large gilt owl that sat at the top, and had dropped down its wings so they covered the whole of the face, and stretched out its ugly head with a short, crooked beak, and looked just like a cat. And the clock whirred louder in plain words: "Dickory, dickory, dock, whirr, softly, clock. Mouse King has a fine ear, purr, purr, pum, pum. The old song let him hear, purr, purr, pum, pum. Or he might run away from a fight. Now the clock strikes softly in the light." And pum, pum, it went with a dull, deadened sound 12 times. Maria began now to tremble with fear, and she was upon the point of running out of the room in terror, when she beheld Godfather Drosselmeyer, who sat in the owl's place on top of the clock, and had hung down the skirts of his brown cloak, just like wings. But she took courage and cried out loudly with sobs, "Godfather Drosselmeyer! Godfather Drosselmeyer! What are you doing up there? Come down! Do not frighten me so, you naughty Godfather Drosselmeyer!" Just then a wild squeaking and whimpering broke out on all sides, and there was a running, trotting and galloping behind the walls, as if 1,000 little feet were in motion, and 1,000 little lights flashed out of the crevices in the floor. But they were not lights. No, they were sparkling little eyes, and Maria perceived that mice were all around, peeping out and working their way into the room. Presently it went trot, trot, hop, hop about the chamber, and more mice, and more, in greater and smaller parties, galloped across, and at the last placed themselves in a line and column, just as Fred had accustomed to place his soldiers when they went to battle. This Maria thought was very droll, and she had not the aversion to mice that most children have. Her terror was gradually leaving her, when, all at once, there arose a squeaking so terrible and piercing that it seemed as if ice-cold water was poured down her back. And now what did she see? I know, my worldly reader Frederick, that thy heart, like the wise and brave soldier Frederick Stahlbaum, sits in the right place. But if thou hadst seen what Maria now beheld, thou wouldst run away certainly. Yes, I believe thou wouldst have jumped as quickly as possible into bed, and then have drawn the covering over thine ears much farther than was necessary to keep thee warm. Alas, poor Maria could not do that now, for, listen children, close before her feet there burst out sand and lime and crumbling walls, as if thrown up by some subterranean force, and 7 mice heads with 7 sparkling crowns rose out of the floor, squeaking and squealing terribly. Presently the mouse's body, to which those 7 heads belonged, worked its way out, and the great mouse, crowned with 7 diadems, speaking loudly, huzzed in a full chorus as it advanced to meet his army, which at once set itself in motion, and hot, hot, trot, trot it went. Alas, straight towards the glass case, straight towards poor Maria, who stood close before it. Her heart beat so terribly from anxiety and fear that she thought it would leap out of her bosom, and she knew she must die. But now it seemed as if the blood stood still in her veins. Half fainting, she tottered backwards, then clatter, clatter, rattle, rattle, rattle it went, and a glass pane which she had struck with her elbow fell in pieces at her feet. She felt at that moment a sharp pain in her left arm, but her heart all at once became much lighter. She heard no more squeaking and squealing. All had become still, and although she did not dare look, yet she believed that the mice, frightened by the clatter of the broken glass, had retreated into their holes. But what was that again? Close behind her, in the glass case, a strange bustling and rustling began, and little fine voices were heard. "Up, up, awake! Arms, take, awake! To the fight, this night! Up, up, to the fight!" And all the while something rang out clear and sweet like little bells. "Ah, that is my dear musical clock!" exclaimed Maria joyfully, and quickly turned to look. Then she saw how it flashed and lightened strangely in the case, and there was a great stir and bustle upon the shelves. Many little figures crossed up and down by each other and worked and stretched out their arms as if they were making ready. And now Nutcracker raised himself all of a sudden, threw off the bedclothes clear, and leaped with both feet at once out of the bed, crying aloud, "Crack, crack, stupid pack! Drive mouse back, stupid pack! Crack, crack, mouse! Back, crick, crack, stupid pack!" With these words he drew his little sword, flourished it in the air, and exclaimed, "My loving vassals, friends and brothers, will you stand by me and fight the hard fight?" Straightway 3 scaramouches, a harlequin, 4 chimney sweeps, 2 guitar players, and a drummer cried out, "Yes, my lord, we will follow you with fidelity and courage. We will march with you to battle, to victory or death." And then they rushed after the fiery Nutcracker, who'd ventured the dangerous leap down from the upper shelf. It was easy for them to perform this feat, for beside the fine garments of thick cloth and silk that they wore, the inside of their bodies was made of cotton and tow, so they came down plump like little bags of wool. But poor Nutcracker had certainly broken his arms or his legs, for remember, it was almost 2 feet from the shelf where he stood to the floor, and his body was as brittle as if it had been made of linden wood. The Nutcracker would certainly have broken his arms or his legs if, at the moment when he leaped, Miss Clara had not sprung quickly from the sofa and caught the hero with his drawn sword in her soft arms. "Ah, thou dear good Clara," sobbed Maria, "how have I wronged thee? Thou didst certainly resign thy bed willingly to little Nutcracker." But Miss Clara now spoke as she softly pressed the young hero to her silken bosom. "You will not, O my lord, sick and wounded as you are, share the dangers of the fight. See how brave your vassals assemble themselves, eager for the fray and certain of conquest. Scaramouche, harlequin, chimney sweepers, guitar players, drummers, all are ready. Up below, and china figures on the shelf stir and move strangely. Will you not, O my lord, repose upon the sofa, or from my arms look down upon your victory?" Thus spoke Clara. But Nutcracker deemed himself very ungracious, for he kicked and struggled so violently with his legs that Clara was obliged to set him down upon the floor. He then, however, dropped gracefully upon one knee and said, "Fair lady, the recollection of thy favour and the condescension will go with me into battle and the strife." Clara then stood up low, and she could take him by the arm, raised him gently from his knees, took off her bespangled girdle, and was about to throw it across his neck. But little Nutcracker stepped 2 paces backwards, laid a hand upon his breast, and said in earnest, "Not so, fair lady, lavish not thy favours thus upon me, for—" He stopped, breathing heavily, tore off the ribbon which Maria had bound about his shoulders, pressed it to his lips, and hung it across him like a scarf, and then, boldly flourishing his bright blade, leaped like a bird over the edge of the glass case onto the floor. You may understand, my kind, good readers and listeners, that Nutcracker, even before he had thus come to life, had felt very sensibly the kindness and love to which Maria had shown towards him, and it was because he had become so partial to her that he would not receive and wear the girdle of Miss Clara, although it shone and sparkled so brightly. The true and faithful Nutcracker preferred to wear Maria's simple ribbon. But what will happen now? As soon as the Nutcracker had leaped out, the squeaking and whistling was heard again, Ah, it is under the large table that the hateful mice have concealed their countless bands, and high above them all towers the dreadful mouse with 7 heads. What will happen now? The battle. "Beat the march, true vassal drummer!" screamed the Nutcracker very loudly, and immediately the drummer began to rattle and roll his drum so skilfully that the windows of the glass case trembled and hummed again. Now it rustled and clattered therein, and Maria perceived that the corners of the little boxes in which Fred's army were quartered were bursting open, and now the soldiers leapt out and down again upon the lowest shelf, where they drew a fine array. Nutcracker ran up and down, speaking inspirational words to the troops. "Let no dog of a trumpeter blow or stir," he cried angrily, for he was afraid he should not be heard, and then turned quickly to Harlequin, who had grown a little pale and chattered with his long chin. "General," he said earnestly, "I know your courage and your experience. There is still need now for a quick eye, and to skill to seize the proper moment. I entrust to your command all the cavalry and artillery. You do not need a horse, for you have very long legs, and can gallop yourself tolerably well. I look to see you do your duty." Thereupon Harlequin put his long, thin fingers to his mouth and whistled so piercingly that it sounded as if 100 shrill trumpets were blown merrily. Then it stirred again in the glass case. A neighing and a whinnying and a stamping were heard, and see, Fred's cuirassiers and dragoons, above all his new splendid hussars, marched out and halted close by the case. Regiment after regiment now defiled before Nutcracker with flying colours and warlike music, and ranged themselves in long rows across the floor of the chamber. Before them went Fred's cannon rattling along, surrounded by the cannoneers, and soon bomb, bomb it went, and Maria could see the mice suffered by the fire, and how the sugar plums plunged into their dark, heavy masses, covering them with white powder and throwing them more than once into shameful disorder. But the greatest damage was done to them by the heavy battery which was mounted upon Mamma's footstool, which pum, pum, kept up a steady fire of caraway seeds against the enemy, which a great many of them caused to fall. The mice, notwithstanding, came nearer and nearer, and at last mastered some of the cannon, but then it went purr, purr, and Maria could scarcely see what had happened now for the smoke and the dust. This, however, was certain, that each corps fought with the greatest animosity, and the victory was for a long time doubtful. The mice kept deploying more and more forces, and the little silver shot, which they fired very skilfully, struck now even into the glass case. Clara and Truncheon ran around in despair. "Must I die in the blossom of youth?" said Clara. "Have I so well preserved myself for this, to perish here in these walls?" cried Truncheon. Then they fell about each other's necks, and screamed so terribly that they could be heard above the mad tumult in the battle. Of the scene that now presented itself, you can have no idea, good reader. It went purr, purr, puff, pit, clitter, clatter, boom, brum, bom. In the wildest confusion, when the Mouse King squeaked and screamed, and now and then the mighty voice of the Nutcracker was heard, as he gave the necessary orders, and he was seen striding along the battalions in the hottest of fire. Harlequin had made some splendid charges with his cavalry, and covered himself in honour, but Fred's hussars were battered by the enemy's artillery, with odious offensive balls, which made dreadful spots on their red jackets, for which reason they would not move forward. Harlequin ordered them to draw off to the left, and, in the enthusiasm of command, headed the movement himself, and the cuirassiers and the dragoons followed, that is, they all drew off to the left and galloped home. By this step the battery upon the footstool was exposed to a great danger, and it was not long before a strong body of very ugly mice pushed on with such determined bravery that the footstool, cannons, cannoneers, and all were overthrown by their headlong charge. Nutcracker seemed a little disturbed by this, and gave orders that the right wing should make a great retreatment. You know very well, O my military reader Frederick, that to make such a movement is almost the same thing as to run away, and you are now grieving with me at the disaster which impends over the army of the Maria's darling Nutcracker. But turn your eyes from this scene and view the left wing, where all is still in good order, and where there is yet great hope, for both the general and the army. During the hottest of the fight, the largest masses of mice cavalry had debauched softly from under the settee, and amid the loud, hideous squeaking, had thrown themselves with fury upon the left wing. But what an obstinate resistance did they meet there! Slowly, as the difficult nature of the ground required, for the edge of the glass case had to be traversed, the china figures had advanced, headed by 2 Chinese emperors, and formed themselves into a hollow square. These brave and motley but noble troops, which were composed of gardeners, Tyrolese, bronzers, fuseurs, merry andrews, cupids, lions, tigers, peacocks, and apes, fought with coolness, courage, and determination. By their Spartan bravery, this battalion of picked men would have wrested the victory from the foe, had not a bold major rushed madly from the enemy's ranks and bitten off the head of one of the Chinese emperors, who, in falling, dashed to the ground 2 bronzers and a cupid. Through this gap the enemy penetrated into the square, and in a few moments the whole battalion was torn to pieces. Their brave resistance, therefore, was of no avail to the Nutcracker's army, which, once having begun to retreat, retired farther and farther, and at every step diminished numbers, until the unfortunate Nutcracker halted with a little band close before the glass case. "Let the reserve advance! Harlequin, Scaramouche, Drummer, where are you?" Thus cried Nutcracker, in hopes of new troops which should deploy out of the glass case. And there actually came forth a few brown men and gingerbread women, with golden faces and caps and helmets, but they fought so awkwardly that they did not hit one of the enemy, and at last knocked the cap off their own general's head. The enemy's chasseurs too bit off their legs, and before long, so that they tumbled over and carried with them to the ground some of the Nutcracker's best officers. Nutcracker, now completely surrounded by the foe, was in the greatest peril. He tried to leap over the edge into the glass case, but found his legs too short. Clara and Truncheon lay each in a deep swoon. They could not help him. Hussars, dragoons sprang merrily by him into safe quarters, and in wild despair he cried, "A horse! A horse! A kingdom for a horse!" At this moment 2 of his enemy's tirailleurs seized him by his wooden mantle, and the Mouse King, squeaking from his 7 throats, leapt in triumph towards him. Maria could no longer control himself. "Oh, my poor Nutcracker!" she cried, sobbing, and without being exactly conscious of what she did, grasped her left shoe and threw it with all her strength into the thickest of the mice, straight at their king. In an instant all seemed scattered and dispersed, but Maria felt in her left arm still a sharper pain than before, and sank in a swoon to the floor. The sickness. When Maria woke out of her deep, death-like slumber, she found herself lying in her own bed, with the sun shining bright and sparkling through ice-covered windows into the chamber. Close beside her sat a stranger, whom she soon recognised, however, as the surgeon Wendelstern. He said softly, "She is awake." Her mother then came to her bedside and gazed at her with anxious and inquiring looks. "Ah, dear mother," lisped little Maria, "are all the hateful mice gone? Is the good Nutcracker safe?" "Do not talk of such foolish stuff," replied her mother. "What have mice to do with the Nutcracker? You naughty child, you've caused us a great deal of anxiety. But so it always is when children are disobedient and do not mind their parents. You played last night with your dolls until it was very late. You became sleepy, probably, and a stray mouse may have jumped out and frightened you. At all events, you broke a pane of glass with your elbow and cut your arm so severely that neighbour Wendelstern has just taken a piece of glass out of the wound and declares it came very near to cutting a vein, in which case you might have had a stiff arm all your life, or perhaps have bled to death. It was fortunate that I woke about midnight, not finding you in your bed, got up and went to the sitting room. There you lay in a swoon on the floor, close by the glass case, and with blood flowing in a stream. I almost fainted myself away at the sight. There you lay, scattered around, their many Frederick's leaden soldiers, broken china figures, gingerbread men and women, and other playthings, and not far off, your left shoe." "Oh, dear mother," exclaimed Maria, interrupting her. "Those were the traces of that dreadful battle between the puppets and the mice, and what frightened me so was the danger of poor Nutcracker when the mice were going to take him prisoner, and then I threw my shoe at the mice, and after that I don't know what happened." Surgeon Wendelstern here made a sign to her mother, and she said very softly to Maria, "Well, never mind about it, my dear child. The mice are gone, and the little Nutcracker stands safe and sound in his case." Dr. Stahlbaum now entered the chamber and spoke for a while with Surgeon Wendelstern. Then he felt Maria's pulse. She could hear very plainly that he said something about a fever. She was obliged to remain in bed and take physic, and so it continued for some days, although, except for a slight pain in her arm, she felt quite well and comfortable. She knew little Nutcracker had escaped from the battle, and it seemed to her that she sometimes heard his voice quite plainly, as if in a dream, saying mournfully, "Maria, dearest lady, what thanks do I not owe you? But you can still do more for me." Maria tried to think what it could be, but in vain nothing occurred to her. She couldn't play very well on account of the wound in her arm. When she tried to read or look at her picture books, a strange glare came across her eyes, so that she was obliged to desist. The time during the day always seemed very long to her, and she waited impatiently for evening, as her mother then usually seated herself by her bedside, and read or related some pretty story to her. One evening she just finished the wonderful story of Prince Fakenard when the door opened. Her godfather Drosselmeyer entered, saying, "I must see you now for myself, how it goes with sick and wounded Maria." As soon as Maria saw Godfather Drosselmeyer in his brown coat, the image of that night in which the Nutcracker lost the battle against the mice returned vividly to her mind, and she cried out involuntarily, "Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, you have been very naughty. I saw you as you sat upon the clock and covered it with your wings, so it should not strike loud to scare away the mice. I heard how you called out the Mouse King. Why did you not come to help us, me and the poor Nutcracker? It is all your fault, naughty Godfather Drosselmeyer, that I must lie here sick in bed." Her mother was quite frightened at this, and said, "What is the matter with you, dear Maria?" But Godfather Drosselmeyer made very strange faces, and said in a grating, monotonous tone, "Pendulum must whir, 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 this way, that way, the clock will strike. Tired of ticking all the day, softly whir, 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 strike, cling, clang, bing, bang, bing, bang, 'twill scare away the Mouse King. Then owl will swift flight comes at the dead of night. Pendulum must whir, whir, clock will strike, cling, clang, this way, that way, tired of ticking all day. Bing, bang, the Mouse King scare away, whir, whir, purr, purr." Maria stared at Godfather Drosselmeyer, for he did not look at all like he usually did, but appeared much uglier, and he moved his right arm backwards and forwards like a puppet pulled by wires. She would have been very afraid of him if her mother had not been present, and if Fred had not slipped in the meanwhile and interrupted him with loud laughter. "Ha ha! Godfather Drosselmeyer," cried, "you're here today to droll again. You act just like my Harlequin, and I threw him in the lumber room long ago." But their mother was very serious and said, "Dear Counsellor, this is a very strange sport. What do you really mean by it?" "Gracious me," replied Drosselmeyer, laughing. "Have you forgotten that my pretty watchmaker's song? I always sing it to Patience as Maria." With this he drew his chair close to her bed and said, "Do not be angry that I did not pick out the Mouse King's 14 eyes. That could not be, but instead I have in store for you a very agreeable surprise." The counsellor, with these words, put his hand in his pocket, drew out something slowly, and behold, it was Nutcracker, with his lost teeth nicely fastened in, and his lame chin set well and sound. Maria cried aloud with joy, and whilst her mother smiled and said, "But you see now, Maria, that Godfather Drosselmeyer meant well by your little Nutcracker." "But you still must confess, Maria, said the counsellor, that the Nutcracker's figure is exactly none of the finest, neither can his face exactly be called handsome. How this ugliness came to be hereditary in the family, I will now relate to you, if you will listen. Or perhaps you know already the story of Princess Pirlipat and Lady Mouserings, and the skilful watchmaker? Look here, Godfather Drosselmeyer, interrupted Fred. Nutcracker's teeth you've fastened in very well, and his chin is no longer lame and crickety. But why has he no sword? Why have you not put on his sword? Ah, replied the counsellor angrily, you always must meddle and make you rogue. What is a Nutcracker's sword to me? I've cured his wounds. He may find his sword for himself as he can. That's true, said Fred. He's a brave fellow, and he will know how to get one. Tell me then, Maria, continued the counsellor, have you heard of the story of Princess Pirlipat? I hope, dear counsellor, said the mother, that your story will not be frightful, as those that you narrate normally are. By no means, dearest madame, replied Drosselmeyer. On the contrary, what I have this time to honour and relate is droll and merry. Begin then, dear father, cried the children in unison, and the counsellor began as follows.